Maybe we'll just begin. So welcome to the section on politics and security for the non-residential fellows. We have a number of really great presentations coming up in the next few weeks. Let me just so today we're going to have a talk by Petro, and then on next week on Monday, February 13th, Vladimir Dubovik will talk about the best ways to improve Ukraine's security, which is obviously important today. Then on March 7th, which is a partial change in the schedule, Artem Ramizov is going to talk about foreign volunteers in the Ukrainian armed forces. Then on March 13th, on Monday, Petro Jacyk will talk about the evolution of East-West divisions in before and after the Russian-Ukrainian war. And finally, Professor Gomza, who I see right there, will talk about the transformative capabilities of war, a comparative study. So I think it's going to really be a great set of talks, and I'm really looking forward to it. And today I just want to briefly introduce Petro Burkovskyi, who is executive director of the Democratic Initiative Foundation. If anybody knows the work of DIF, they produced sort of a stunning array of public opinion data. I used you guys extensively during Euromaidan because you've done this amazing survey of participants in the protests, which was definitely the best available at the time, and offered a unique window into what was going on. Petro Burkovskyi has been executive director of DIF. Before that, he spent 14 years at the National Institute for Strategic Studies. And since 2004, he's been heavily involved in examining the impact and the nature of propaganda and manipulation in both Russia and Ukraine. So Petro, I'll sort of hand it off to you, and you can just give your presentation, and then we'll have a sort of hopefully a nice discussion after that.
Thank you, Lucan. Thank you to everybody who is present and who is going to listen to this. I'm thrilled really to start this series of talks and presentations. Although I hope that
sorry, go ahead.
Although I hope that all the next presentations will be far greater than mine, really. Because while you see the topic, it's Russian media as an instrument of war and how to counteract these narratives. We are living with this propaganda for many years, and the topic is not new. So I don't think that I will tell you something new, but still I hope for your mercy to listen me to the very end. So let me start with a suggestion, with an idea that this war showed that the language is one of the most, I think the most efficient tools of the Russian aggression. And why? I argue and I put here two ideas. Because language is a universal tool which helps a human being to appropriate surrounding hostile nature and to turn it into the comfortable environment which is predictable, rational, and shared by the humans. And secondly, in the case of Russian language is a semantic tool of the Russian presence and domination in every part of the world where people talk or understand Russian very well. And it also serves the Russian language also serves as a tool of mediation and translation of all the senses that are created and imposed by the Russian power structures, whatever legal or historical forms they took in the past and now. And from these two ideas that language makes the war continue, I am coming to the next two ideas, how propaganda works. In my opinion, and I argue based on my experience working in Ukraine, that in order to make propaganda work, you need two elements. First, you need a good doctrine, which is a set of ideas or principles which teaches you how to live in this world and how to differ good from evil. And this doctrine could be based on a tradition, that it could be based on the sacred texts or the legal norms. And I argue that in case of Russia, we have no doctrine, but we have a doctrine-like basis. And when you have this doctrine or the set of ideas, you then can create or construct your narrative. In order to construct the narrative, you select, use, and combine memories that are widespread in the society, that are comfortable for people, and which are seen rational. Why do you need all of this? You need to make your narrative look credible like a doctrine or like a worldview. And my point is that credible is, and you think that the narrative is credible and you can use it and trust it because it's something, because something makes you remember it. And an incredible narrative is the one that you don't remember, or you don't know because you don't want to know, or you cannot access the relevant knowledge. And here I just want to say, and that here I'm begin to present my main part of my presentation. And I must tell you that in my opinion, Kremlin, the KGB and FSB are very good at inventing doctrines, constructing narratives, manipulating words, and demotivating people from looking for something else. Here is my main part of my presentation. So on February 24, many people were shocked to know from the Putin's war speech that one of the three major goals of the war was a denazification of Ukraine. To many people, it sounded like a delusion. In the coming months, a lot of people learned and were shocked by the fact how many Russians truly believed that Ukraine does need denazification. However, and here is my point, is that Putin was very rational in putting this and explaining the cause for the war. In his speech, he used memes and anchors connected to the Soviet narrative about the Second World War, which is in Russia is known as a Great Patriotic War. For decades, this narrative was used to reframe Second World War as a Great Patriotic War and impose a system of ideological markers of good and evil, including the respective and quite extensive dictionary, specific words which describe the reality. And all the people, and by saying this, I also base this argument on my own experience and talking to the people throughout these years, that for many people born between 1941 and 1981, the year when I was born, from the very early childhood, these people were taught to use these topics, these memes and these anchors in order to describe the world. The problem with Russians is that, unlike Ukrainians, which had an alternative view of the history of the Soviet years, what was during the Second World War, what was after the Second World War, how people struggled to survive, how communists oppressed peasants' families, and the peasants, they comprised the majority of the Ukrainian pre-war and the post-war society. But unlike in Ukraine, Russians had very little knowledge, an alternative collective memory of what was going on. So that was the trouble. And therefore, when Putin came to power in the years 2000, these people were a majority in Russia, and Putin political technologists just refreshed this dictionary and rephrased political and social reality of Russia. And this had an impact also everywhere where Russian language was widely used and actively used in the everyday communication. And then many efforts in these years, in these 20 years before the war, were made to portray Putin and to make Putin the champion of this doctrine an exclusive user and beneficiary of such rephrased reality. Starting from the year, I think, 2010, Putin started a revision of historical memory, claiming that the Russian people are exclusive winners or victors of the Second World War, and this have happened without Ukraine at all. And if one nation is exclusively is framed as the victors or the winners of the war, then any enemy of this nation can be framed as a Nazi, or the people who would be defeated and will have no chance to survive. On the next slide, I just put the quote from the Putin's direct line, so-called direct line, when he talked to the people of Russia. And he was asked the question about the relations with Ukraine. And here you see in the Russian, he says that even
can you show the slide?
Sorry?
Can you show the slide?
Yes.
All we see is the first slide.
You see only first slide, but I'm
you're not switching them.
I'm just
there we go.
No, I'm just okay. Do you see this slide?
Yeah,
now it's okay.
On site in Ukrainska Pravda right now. Yep.
Oh, sorry, because when I talked, I moved slides. Did you see it?
We see it now.
No, we didn't. See.
Oh, okay, then. Okay, do you see the slide changes right now?
No.
No.
Anyway, just
now we're seeing the
Golovec slide.
Okay, then I will have to switch each slide separately.
Okay.
What the reason? So here is the quote, Putin's quote. He said during the direct line in 2010, and that was the time of the Ukrainian presidential elections. And he was asked the question about the relations with Ukraine, and he argued that even if Russia would have been alone, if Russia had been alone, it would have won the war without Ukraine. And he claimed, and he put his argument referring to statistics of the Second World War, despite the fact that all statistics during the Stalin's time was falsified. And he referred to this as to the historical fact that Russia is the main driving force behind the victory in the Second World War, and not Ukraine or any other state. So my point is that it was the time when he explicitly started to build the myth of the exclusive of the Russian nation as an exclusive winner in the Second World War, and therefore that all who do not, everybody who doesn't agree with this is the Russian enemy and denier of the Russian victory. Okay, so on the next slide, you see that after that, so what he was doing is that Russians were very persistent in reinventing their current history with using the words of the myth of the Great Patriotic War, and starting from January 2014, Russians began to use the anchors and the terms like fascists, Nazis, Nazism, describing Ukrainian protest in Maidan. So here you see the quote from the first TV channel, Russian mainstream and major TV channel. And this is a report from Kiev, and you see how in Russian the reporter describes the protagonists of this protest. So he specifically points out only on the nationalists. So he called leader of one of the nationalist parties, Svoboda, as a neo-fascist. He also tries to impose the impression that because of the neo-fascism, Svoboda was excluded from some union of the European nationalists. Then he refers to pro-right sector or the right sector the umbrella organization which united a number of small nationalist organizations. But again, what Russians were doing, and you can see it, I highlighted it in bold, they used the name of Stepan Bandera and the name of Banderevci as a scarecrow to frighten Russians. And by using this, they were referring to the narrative, to the Stalinist narrative of the Second World War. Then Ukrainians who fought against the Red Army were described as Nazis collaborators who killed Russians, Poles, and Jewish people. So these are the same words they used in this TV program in January 2014 to portray Ukrainians as Nazis. And then next time, okay. So yes, and I just give this one example, this one quote from January 2014. But believe me, if I would collect, it would take hundreds of pages of different radio, TV reports, newspaper, magazine articles, where Russian journalists, TV presenters, TV anchors used a number of words to persuade Russian people that the source of the troubles in Ukraine were radicals, nationalists, punishers. It's very specific words in Russian karateli, which means which was used in the dictionary of the Great Patriotic War to describe collaborators or Einsatz groups of the SS Waffen, which exterminated civilian population. So this word karateli or punishers was used to describe the Ukrainian army servicemen or the National Guard of Ukraine servicemen. And that was said that these all people, these all inglorious bastards, they took power after Maidan and attacked Russian-speaking people in the eastern Ukraine, specifically in Donetsk and Luhansk region. On the other hand, the Russians used another interesting word from this great patriotic war dictionary, an opolchency, which can be translated into English like a non-professional militia, mostly volunteers, who defended Moscow and other Russian cities during the German invasion in 1941. The word was adopted by Stalin, but it was not a new term. Stalin adopted it from the old Russian tradition of the war against Napoleon in 1920. And also, like Stalin, the mainstream Russian media called the aggression which began in 2014 as an act of heroism, as a sacred deed. And they celebrated all killed and wounded in this war as the new Russian martyrs who died for the Russian idea. So the next concept, which was used in 2022, but which was invented in 2014, was the concept of the people of Donbass, people of Donetsk and Luhansk, which is in Russian word is narod, and that's quite a tricky invention, I would say successful invention, because in Russian there are many words to call the people: narod, население, люди, and they are all synonyms to mark the population, inhabitants. But in the West, especially, it was translated like people, which is a very close synonym to the concept of the nation. And Russians inside Russia, when they use this word narod, or abroad, then they tried to use the word people of Donbass. They tried to make an impression that there is a separate nation of Donbass. And these people are very different from the Ukrainian nations. And what they were doing, they were calling Ukrainians in Donetsk and Luhansk nations as a separate nation that are not Ukrainians. And therefore, they use this concept to justify inside Russia and abroad, to justify the military aid to what they say military aid, but what in fact was the direct military intervention. And they use it to justify the use of the concept, the well-known concept of rights to protect people against a grave danger, specifically from genocide. And then when in his war speech, in his address, which you can see on your screen, on February 24, Putin did refer to the genocide and to the atrocity as a cause why Russia should start the special military operation. But Putin's reference was also not new, because they started to use the term genocide, referring to Ukrainian defense in Donbass, since October 2013. And I argue that here is one of the first, I think, in my opinion, it was the first use of the term of genocide on a very high political level. So here you can see the quote from the Russian newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda, Komsomol Truth in English, and this is the interview of Sergei Ivanov, who at that time was the head of the administration of president. So the second or third man in power at that time. And that was the first time when they used the word genocide to describe, as he said, what was going on in Donbass. And he blamed Ukrainian authorities and Ukrainian army for committing genocide against people of Donbass. And when you use such a strong word, you need to have confirmation and evidence that actually you have this genocide. And that's really important, because this word, even in Russia, it's reminiscent of the World War II atrocities. Then, starting from 2014, Russian media and Russian intelligence began to fabricate evidence. And here you see another quote in Russian. That's a quote from the TV program broadcasted on a Russian, second important Russian TV channel, Russia, in late September. It was like 3 weeks before Sergei Ivanov's interview, and it describes the so-called consequences of the so-called genocide committed by Ukrainians. If you look and if you read carefully, you will see that it was described with the same words, with the same visual symbols that in fact were present in Bucha. So you can see that there were mass graves, people with their hands tied behind their back, who were shot from behind in their heads, so executed. The same has happened in Bucha in March last year. But Russians in 2014 started to appropriate reality and to rephrase reality as if Ukrainians are committing a genocide. And can you imagine if for the last 8 years, not on a regular basis, but time to time, Russian audience, Russian people were watching, listening, hearing, and reading materials about genocide committed by Ukrainian forces in Donbass. So the point for this was to conceal the what the Russians themselves have done in Donbass. And finally, here we come to the point of the year 2022. My question is, what I suggest is that concept of Nazis, concept of the separate people, concept of the genocide committed of Ukraine, all of these concepts and anchors, they were used in the beginning of 2022 to justify invasion of Ukraine as an act of defense. And here you can see also the quote of Putin TV address that was taken by me from the official Kremlin site. So it's an official translation from Russian to English. And you can see here all the elements that I described, that the NATO countries are supporting far-right nationalists and neo-Nazis. So Russians knew this for the last 8 years. And again, they heard this. So these neo-Nazis supported by the West, they are scheming to attack Crimea and to kill as many people as possible, Putin claims. And therefore, they're trying to repeat the crime committed by Hitler during the Great Patriotic War. So in order to prevent this, Putin says we have no option. So this crafted reality leaves no option to Putin but to start the war against Ukraine and call it the act of defense. And if we look back, if you look back to the 2014 or even earlier, I can say that this was very rational. This was very persuading inside Russia. And therefore, Putin was quite successful in beginning this war. So the war was very well prepared on the rhetorical level. And when you start the war and you try to justify it, what you need to do, and what the Russians were doing on a massive, on a huge scale, is that you take your own action, questionable, illegal, when you take your own atrocities committed by your own army, and you claim that this was exactly what your opponents are doing. And it really works if the audience also shares your definition of good and evil. And here I just give two examples, a quite striking one, how the Russians plausibly accused Ukrainians of genocide, so that Ukrainians' claims of genocide do not look trustworthy. So first one is the quote from the local newspaper. I took specifically local newspaper, not the mainstream, but to show you how deep is the penetration of the Russian propaganda in Russian media, especially on the regional level. So it's a Volgogradska Pravda. It's not very big newspaper, and they described they put the blame on the terrorist attack in Kramatorsk. On the 8th of April, the Russian ballistic missile .U with a cassette warhead hit the train station in Kramatorsk, killing 60 people and including 7 children, and injuring more than 110 people. But what
he seems to be frozen.
He actually might have a power cut at his apartment. I mean, that is why he disconnected.
Oh yeah, okay.
We have to wait and see. He might come back if he has some additional source of power, and if he doesn't, well,
then well, he's already given us significant amount to discuss. But let's hang tight. Olga, are you there?
Hello?
Yeah. Are you able to contact Petro and see see what's going on? Or I mean, if you're able to contact him, obviously, maybe not.
Yeah, I'll try.
Yeah. Yeah, this is sort of the nature of the world we live in. But So I think if he doesn't come back, I mean, I think we can just maybe use this opportunity, not waste it, and kind of discuss your reactions to what he's said so far. Let's see if he comes back. I think I'm sure all of you have you know, your perspective on the sort of Russian narrative and Russian propaganda. I mean, this is definitely consistent with stuff that I've heard from, you know, friends and acquaintances, or former friends, acquaintances in Moscow, who have you know, who very much see, kind of buy the narrative of Ukrainians as Nazis, and sort of in the genocide narrative. You know, specifically, what sort of came up in my, you know, early in the war. I mean, I have many friends from my time in Moscow in the late 1980s, and I somehow had a fair number of friends, 2 or 3, who actually supported the war, and so I tried to, you know, convince them otherwise. That largely failed, so I've ceased to become friends with them. But in the beginning, we talked about the reaction. You know, I asked my former friend Lev Segal, you know, why he supported the war, and he said that it was, you know, in reaction to the fire in Odessa, and sort of kind of what he saw as Ukrainian, you know, attacks on civilians during the oh, here, never mind. Okay, so Petro is coming back.
Oh, yes, sorry.
That's okay.
No problem, no problem. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your patience. So
No problem.
it's just so only several slides, and this will be the end.
Yeah, yeah.
So here, what I've just tried to show how Russian media fabricated news, and how they rephrased, said that something wrong was done not by the Russian forces, but by the Ukrainian forces. So first, very striking example, as I said, the missile attack on a Kramatorsk train station. A lot of killed, a lot of wounded, and in all Russian media on the next day, specifically in the morning, this attack was framed as the Ukrainian terrorist attacks against its own civilians. And the Russian media claimed that was done to terrify people and to break their will to resistance, to the resistance and their will to liberation, which, as they said, was carried out by the Russian special military operation. And another example that I put here, it's also very telling. The Russians fabricated news that the Ukrainian forces attacked maternity hospital in Donetsk, killing and injuring people, young mothers, babies, etc., etc. But why they have done it? In my opinion, it was done to invent a cover-up for the same, not the same, but for the attack that Russians carried out against the maternity hospital in Mariupol. And this was not the first example that I saw in the previous years. One of the first examples was the Odessa tragedy, when the people died and were killed inside the so-called the House of Trade Unions in Odessa. However, before that, in January, Berkut forces in Kiev, they attacked and burned down the House of Trade Unions in Kiev. And I do not think that is a coincidence that's a coincidence in Odessa that this location was also chosen in purpose in order to overshadow the same crime committed against the House of Trade Unions in Kiev. So now, since May 2014, everybody was talking about the tragedy of Odessa House of Trade Unions, and people started to forget about what happened in the Kiev House of Trade Unions in the same manner. So both houses were burned, and both they were the houses of trade union. So actually Russians, my point is that they are very careful, they are very smart in choosing words and in staging, especially in staging specific tragic events in order to rewrite people's memory, in order to force people remember one events and forget the others. Okay, next point. And now we can speak about whether what has worked and what hasn't worked in the last 10 months. I think that the weakness of this thesis that the Russian army is defending Russia inside Ukraine, and the weakness of this thesis was very evident to the Russian propagandists. Therefore, they have to use a number of emotional arguments to support it and to endorse. So first of all, it was a constant invention, fabrication, and repetition of the battlefield successes. Every day, the Ministry of Defense of Russia, Russian correspondents, now this mission is also carried out by the so-called Russian war correspondents. They report about successes and Ukrainian failures, successes of the Russian army and failures of the Ukrainian army. Then strong denial of any failures or mistakes. Everyday appeal to the sacred duty and the heroism to die for the country. And the very important point, it's every time they repeat that the decision of Putin was the only right, and they try to impose a suggestion of Putin's infallibility. However, if we look at the events, the next my point is that the greatest challenge to this very efficient, very sophisticated and smart system of propaganda and narratives, of Russian narratives, the only thing that can challenge it is the reality, the facts of life, especially if they are witnessed by the people. So I argue that last year there were 3 such moments that undermined the official narrative seriously and made a lot of Russians doubt that the special military operation is successful, and to doubt that Putin was right by starting the war. So first, that was the number of explosions in Crimea in August, when the Russian military installations were attacked, and the outcomes of these attacks were highly visible for the people. And specifically, the first explosion on the seashore when the Ukrainian forces attacked the Russian air base in Novofyodorovka, that was followed by the Great Fire and Great Smoke. This was filmed and distributed across the social media, and specifically one of the most famous and popular video clip which showed the consequences of the Ukrainian attack, and they are followed by the words of the spectator that "Mom, we need to get away as soon as possible." In Russian, it sounded really fascinating how it was said. Next, after Putin proclaimed the partial mobilization, a lot of people, thousands of people, males, decided to leave the country. And there are also a great circulation of videos of the big queues at the Russian border checkpoints, queues of the people, queues of the cars, with the people who wanted to leave Russia as soon as possible and to evade the military draft. And finally, the third point was the destruction, partial destruction of the so-called Crimea breach in October, just a day after the Putin's birthday. So these all evidence, they were so striking, and they were so evident. They could not, that the Russian forces, the Russian intelligence or FSB or Kremlin or Russian media just couldn't rephrase it or reframe it in a positive way. And that has shaken and propaganda seriously. However, in my impression that they reacted quite quickly and with such decisions as in order to prove that everything is okay in the country and in the war, they started to glorify the war crimes and genocidal tactics against the enemies. So они это заслужили, they deserve it. And also this includes the threat to use nuclear weapons against the West and against Ukraine. So this point was to make sure that in any way we will prevail despite all the failures on the battlefield. Secondly, what was done in November, and I can refer you to the article written by Alexander Dugin. Very interesting. This article was published on the second day after liberation of Kherson. And this article was named the Kherson, the last line of retreat. Последний рубеж отступления. Kherson, последний рубеж отступления. And Dugin, in this article, he called to Putin to install a dictatorship, a monarch regime, and to install official ideology, a compulsory ideology of Russian idea, in order to prevent the defeat in the war. And finally, the third point is that the Russian media took the idea of Yevgeny Prigozhin of creating stormtroops consisting of the criminals and other mercenaries, which will not only fight in Ukraine, but which will be used against the dissident inside the country. And on the other hand, they started disseminating fear of the terrorist attacks carried by Ukrainians against Russians in order to terrify Russians and to instigate the hatred toward Ukrainians. That was the response to the military failures and to these facts which appeared in the late 2022. Finally, and this is my final slide and my final point. From what I have seen and from what I have studied in the recent years and in the recent months during this war, and when anybody would ask me what to do and how to tackle Russian propaganda, I would suggest 3 ways how to do this based on what I have already presented. I think that when you speak against propaganda, then you try to uncover it. It could be in vain unless you undermine the very basis of this propaganda, meaning the falsification of history. And there are a lot of facts that Russians themselves cannot deny, that they have to agree with. And these are the facts that are very inconvenient for them. For instance, just to quote several. First of all, you can find in the works of Richard Pipes how the general staff of the Russian Imperial Army reported to the Russian Tsar about the wars which Russia conducted beginning from 1700 till the 1870. And they proudly said that Russia was involved in 38 wars, and 36 of these wars were offensive when Russia attacked the neighbors. If you looked then since 1870 until our days, and if you look, there were also approximately 26 or 24 wars, depending on whether you count the Soviet intervention into Ethiopia and Angola. And all of these wars, except 2, were also offensive. So actually, Russia is not a peaceful nation. It's an empire by its nature, and it's supported by the facts which Russians collected and recorded themselves. Second fact is that when they refer to Hitler and to the Nazis, it should be reminded that Stalin was the man who made an agreement with Hitler to divide Poland, and which was the beginning of the Second World War. So Russians are also the Stalinist regime is an accomplice of Hitler. And therefore you can build a bridge between the people who like Stalin and who maybe like Hitler and who can justify a genocide. And also there are plenty of words said by Putin himself before 2014 or even before 2022, when he said that he respects Ukrainian sovereignty, territorial integrity, that he is not going to attack Ukraine. So everything of this should be reminded to the people to tackle propaganda and to show that Russians are constantly lying. Second important point is that in order to repel the Russian narrative, we should pay a great attention and attract a great attention to the evidence of the Russian war crime in Ukraine. This is very important because in this way we can also try to talk to the Russians. They do remember these stories of atrocities of the Second World War based on the evidence of the victims and survivors. When victims and survivors talk, this also can make an influence. They can influence at least a part of the Russian society and can make them change their minds to support the Putin. And finally, when I refer to the foreigners, to the Westerners specifically, I would ask that in any way you cannot fight propaganda. What you can do to protect your countries is just stop, to prohibit the use of the Russian official sources, state officials, all the Russian media as the sources of information, and prohibit the dissemination of their news reports and statements in the media and in the social media of the country. No other way could be more efficient, or all other ways could be less efficient and more dangerous in the long term. So here I stopped. Thank you for tolerating me for the 50 minutes, including a pause. And thank you all, and waiting for your questions. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. That was amazing. That was amazing. Thank you. So we can open it up to discussion. I just want to start off with maybe a couple questions. First of all, you know, can you talk about sort of how you might assess the efficacy within Russia of these narratives in terms of available surveys? I mean, I understand there are obviously all sorts of problems, but I'm sure you've looked into that and sort of, you know, what you see in the kind of Russian public opinion data. And the second question is, it seems to me another way of countering the Russian narrative is through sort of what has so far been remarkably impeccable Ukrainian behavior, and sort of in terms of maintaining the moral high ground. And I'm thinking here of both the sort of what is striking to me is the relative dearth, the sort of lack of evidence of abuse of Russian prisoners of war, which would be, you know, in principle quite understandable given, you know, Russians attacked my home community. You know, I think many people would be forgiven for, you know, abuse of them and the like. And the other being sort of Zelensky, you know, his origin, his kind of fact that he was, you know, grew up speaking Russian, is from central Ukraine, does not meet the sort of the standard stereotype of a Russian nationalist or sort of supporter of Stepan Bandera. And I think both those things have made sort of Russia's job significantly harder. So I just wanted to get your reaction to both of those, and then I'm going to open it up to the others.
Okay, I didn't hear your first question, and then I tried to answer the second. And then, if you can, would you mind if I ask you to repeat the first one? Well, Yes, I think that it is possible that the world is more favorable toward Ukrainians because of the two facts. First, nobody expected that we will survive. So therefore, I can tell you just my own experience. Then I was in Qatar in the first 2 months of the war. I was speaking on a Qatar TV channel together with Russian. So it was a great experience and a great exercise. I heard everything I learned from him, and for me it was quite easy to debunk everything he said. But what very interesting, the biggest and the most striking fact was that when I claimed for several days that they will never achieve any success, and I put the facts before the TV anchors, before the editors, and I rationally explained why it's not possible using my knowledge of the military science, of the political science, of the international relations. Finally, I used also my knowledge of the Ukrainian society, which I studied. And when it appeared that I am right and my opponent is wrong, that changed a lot. That changed an attitude. That when you're speaking with the world using the rational arguments without trying deception, right? When you speak, when there were hard moments and mistakes made by the Ukrainians, so I admitted this, and I said why, how they can be corrected and why they would be corrected. Specifically, I'm speaking about the situation in the south of Ukraine when the Russians crossed the Dnieper and besieged Mykolaiv. When you're using the rational arguments and the arguments that are supported by the facts on the ground, then people started to listen to you more carefully. They start to respect your point of view, and that. The point, I think, that's why Ukrainians, before the invasion, Ukrainians were not respected by the Westerners, and in other parts of the world where many people didn't know anything about Ukraine. So on the one hand, they have the image of the Russia, which is a great state, a great power, nuclear power with the second largest army in the world, with all the fancy weapons, and on the other hand, you have a fragile, let's say, state, Ukraine, which was portrayed as a Western pawn. Specifically in the Middle East, in Africa, Ukraine is described even now as a pawn of the West, as a Western proxy. And now, after the 10 months of war, almost a year of war, the world sees that Ukraine is not a pawn, that it's a strong country with a strong society, and it deserves respect, and it deserves that its point of view should be heard and should be taken into account. So my answer to you is that I think that as long as we do things that are respected in the world, then it's the best way to tackle any Russian propaganda.
So you're saying that the best way to counter Russian propaganda is to win. I think,
Yes.
I think definitely that is the most effective way. But I mean, it's interesting. I was talking with Christopher Freeland about this, and I think one of the reasons why there hasn't been Ukraine fatigue in the West is not just because Ukraine has the moral high ground, but because the Ukraine is winning to an extent that people didn't appreciate. My second question has to do with assessing the efficacy of Russian propaganda using available public opinion polls in Russia. And I'm wondering if you've at all looked at the Levada Center. I mean, they're obviously problematic for obvious reasons, but there still have been a number of different polls that have come out, and what you think of those.
Well, frankly speaking, I will give you my point of view, very subjective. I don't think that they can make use of it. People are really afraid of speaking their opinion For me, it was why I won't use this as an evidence of any kind of trend. For me, as for political scientists, the best evidence was the long queues, as I said, at the Russian borders. Hundreds of thousands of people were living. Because why? First, they thought that the war is a stupid thing. Second, they didn't believe that the war goes in a good way according to the plan, as Putin claimed. And third, they didn't want to become a cannon fodder in this war. They just wanted to continue their lives. So for me, that was the best evidence of the scale of the protest movement. On the other hand, I do understand why Russian authorities didn't close the border. For them, it's better that these people leave the country because they are dissenters. And it's better if the country had any kind of dissent. I don't think that any kind of poll conducted in Russia, at least publicly published poll, right, can show us any trend. I do heard in the previous years that Kremlin did conduct closed public polls for their own need, and maybe they are more accurate. And I think they do this in order to measure the opinion. However, right now, I think that the atmosphere of fear is becoming so impressive in Russia that even the closed polls won't show you relevant information. So again, short answer, no, I won't use the opinion polls in Russia, even done by the respected Levada Center.
Okay, great, thank you. Serhiy Blavatsky, did you have something to say? Hello? Go ahead. Serhiy. We can't hear you. Hello? Do you have something to say? Yeah, Petro, can you?
Yeah, hello. Well, thank you, Petro, for a wonderful presentation. My question to you is the following. Don't you think that we are over-focusing on the propaganda as a tool and as an instrument in general? Because, well, a good question is, would the Russians support the war anyway? This is something that really bothers me. I mean, of course, I understand what kind of influence the propaganda has. I mean, it really helps mobilize people's support and etc. But in the end of the day, I have a suspicion that propaganda is really some kind of instrument of really mobilizing support, but not maybe you know, changing the things, because it comes from the, as you mentioned, actually, it comes from the stories and narratives that were there before the propaganda was really used or put in place. And also another point is that I think in the future, many Russians would say that they were supporting the war because of the propaganda, right? Because what could they do? They didn't know the real truth. But I'm kind of again coming to my first point that they would support the war anyway. That's what I think. But anyway, I would like to hear your opinion on that. Thanks.
Well, I don't know whether they would support the war anyway. If you pick up any person on the streets and you asked, would you like to kill another person, or would you like to die for your government? I don't think that's that's a subjective view. I think that 90% of the people, because they are normal humans, they are not normal human beings, they would say that no, we don't want to kill anybody, and of course we don't want to die. So therefore, I do not agree with you that Russians anyway would support the war. I can agree with you that Russians did not understood the consequences of the war. It's not my idea. That idea was, I think, described in a good way by Erich Fromm, right? When he said that the people would like to, that many people under certain conditions, under certain social conditions, when they are not successful, when they do not see good and accessible opportunities to improve their lives, that they will exchange their freedom for their material well-being. That's what has happened in Russia. They do exchange their liberty, their freedom, a lot of people, for their material well-being, and they delegated all the power about all the decision making about the future of their country to the very little group of the people. And so therefore I think they hoped for some reason, and I think the propaganda did play an important role in this, in persuading and giving people this false hope that everything will end very quickly. A kind of evidence, we also talked to people. There was a part of our survey among the IDPs, people from Kharkiv, from Donbass region, who had relatives inside Russia. And it was not, so we were some people who were saying when they talked to their relatives in Russia, and their relatives tried to somehow they said that it won't take a lot, it won't take much time, so you need just to be patient and to wait for several days, and then everything will end, our army will prevail, and the order would be restored. You have only to wait for some days. So that was a frank discussion between the relatives. So people did believe in the might of the Russian army. So therefore, they did not support the war. They were given a false hope. So they hoped that Putin knows, that Putin knew what he was doing, and that the army would deliver what it promised, would deliver the victory. So therefore, they supported the war. They supported Putin, and they supported the idea that they will be victorious again. And why? Why they think so? Because, as I said, for many years, since 2010, they were persuaded that they were a nation of victors, that this is their national destiny, let's say, to have a wise leadership and the destiny of the victors. So therefore, that was a very dangerous illusion. I am very sorry that in the West, a lot of decision makers did not see this dangerous illusion inside Russia and how it was nurtured.
Yeah, but Putin himself hoped he would, overpower Ukraine in several days. So maybe it wasn't a lie; it was a false hope, in this case.
I cannot say anything about Putin.
Serhiy, go ahead. Go ahead. Hello? Serhiy wants to ask a question, but I'm not sure. Okay, Katerina Butz. Go ahead. I can't hear you. I still can't hear you. Okay.
Neither do I, which means Katerina has a problem with the microphone.
Okay.
Maybe you can change the microphones.
Yeah, no, yours,
or you can type the questions.
yeah, you type the question.
To the chat.
Oh, okay. In the meantime, Hannah, you want to ask something?
Yes, thank you. But Andreas raised a hand first. Maybe Andreas
Okay.
will ask.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right,
Somebody
thank
ask a
you.
question. My God. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm Andras Kazakamp. I'm the professor of Estonian history here at University of Toronto. I just had two observations about the power of these historical narratives in Russian propaganda, not so much as they're geared or directed towards Russians or Ukrainians, but how they work in the wider world. And as a historian, I was sort of pessimistic about your sort of counter remedies of if only people would understand history better, then they would come to the right conclusions. If only they knew the facts about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, right, and all the Soviet imperialism in the past. And I'm kind of pessimistic about that for two reasons, because there's sort of one thing, if we look at international media, there is, say, take the BBC or any large news media outlet in the West, and they have this doctrine of everything being balanced, right? So you can have the Ukrainian explaining the facts, and then you can have the Russian lying, but both have to have an equal opportunity. And so even if it's clear that the Russian message is false, it still gets the airtime. It still reaches people, even though you have someone, a Ukrainian or another expert, sort of debunking it, it still reaches the public because of this unfortunate sort of striving to always achieve balance and not really calling out lies. The other thing, which is very frustrating to observe in the wider world when trying to explain what's going on, is that no matter what the facts and the historical context are, a lot of people generate their own views or positions from deeply previously held positions that have nothing to do with Ukraine or Russia. For many people in the world, it all has to do with the US. It's the Iraq War. Bush did this. Or if you're in Latin America or Africa or Asia, it's all about, okay, the Americans are supporting the Ukrainians, and the Americans have done bad things in our part of the world. Thus, we don't have sympathy for the Ukrainians, that it's somehow not our thing. And so that's the sad thing, that trying to enlighten historical facts just isn't going to break through that sort of what are the bigger forces in the world. And this is something that I comment in the Canadian media, and I try to explain these things, and it's very difficult to overcome. And as an Estonian, another point from your presentation that I was reminded of is how back in the 1980s and early 90s in the independence struggle for the Estonians, that the same Russian label of everyone who was for independence, they were fascists. And it was always a small clique. Even it was the whole nation practically was working for independence, it was still a small clique of Nazis, extremists at the top, exactly the same narrative, who were leading us away from the Soviet paradise. So thank you for your presentation. I mean, as a historian, I want to believe that that is the solution, that if only people could get the facts about Soviet imperialism, that this would make them change their minds. But unfortunately, I'm pessimistic about that.
Thank you, Andres. I'm also pessimistic as you. However, I think that it's the mission of the Ukrainian intellectuals who are not in the front line, like me, to do everything what we can and even more to disseminate these facts. Maybe I'm a little bit less pessimistic because I talked in the Middle East, in Qatar. I talked to many people, to Palestinians, to Egyptians, Algerians. I just mentioned three categories, like three representatives of three nations who were more, let's say, not pro-Russian, but maybe more anti-Western, and therefore they were quite suspicious, right, towards Ukraine. However, when they really have time, so if these people are educated, so and when you have time to talk to them and step by step explaining them, at least they start to become less suspicious. And when these talks continue, they become even neutral or even more positive toward Ukraine. So yes, it took a lot of time. Your partner in the dialogue should be an educated person. So therefore, the education, the level of education and the opportunities for talks, for dialogues, they improve very slowly, very gradually, very slowly, but they can improve the situation. So it's a pessimistic, but with a slight chance of improving the situation.
Thanks. Katerina, do you want to say something?
You can still hear me, right?
Yeah.
You can? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm typing my question. So thank you. Very stimulating, directly stimulating conversation and discussion. I had actually three questions. So first, so when you mentioned that Putin refers to Russia as having the greatest losses during the so-called Great Patriotic War, I mean, what do they refer to? I mean, we know that just Belarus and Ukraine, because like the war happened mostly on these territories, had like proportionally the highest human losses, at least. I mean, and you said that he referred to some documents. So does he just make in numerical values? It was the highest losses, or is there any historic evidence that he proves, or just propaganda? So second question regarding people of Donbass. So when you say that Russian propaganda posits that it's separate people, is it separate from Ukrainian people only or from Russian as well? And if it is not separate from Russian people, how do they then explain why Donbass is not treated at least as the status that Crimea is? So they basically do not want Donbass to be a part of Russian Federation, and for economic reasons further, but in order to have an effective message to target this population, you also need to explain. So if you belong to us, so just to explain why you're still, unrecognized republic somewhere with no rights or whatever. And the set or maybe comment or question is just that I also agree that just that rationality is not really working here. I mean, just we are all, the victims of enlightenment in the sense. We also became Putin will not invade Russia because it's so irrational. I mean, nobody would do it in 21st century, but still. And we see that even like in Germany, and like in European countries, and even among educated people, the rational arguments do not always work. And I assume they would not really work like for general population in Russia. So what I mean, obviously, as you said, we do not have the situation on the ground. We don't meet people. The surveys are not representative. But from we hear, like from the anecdotal evidence, probably emotional arguments would appeal better. And we know that just when there were protests against the war, as you say, anti-war, it was not against the war. It's not that the Russians saw that that it is unjust war and they're saying that we should invade other independent countries. It's just they did not want to be killed. They didn't want their children, their husbands to be killed. So I think that if you want, to send, some anti-war message to Russians, it shouldn't be about rationality, about, some human rights or whatever, because we see that it doesn't work. Is it because Russian propaganda was so effective, or we deal with some kind of religious imagination that has this, imperial discourse, which is so ingrained into the minds that really cannot really combat it with rationalistic arguments? That's why I think that, yeah, I agree. So this argument that you propose are really, they are very good for some educated, intellectuals from different countries who know how it should work. But if we really want, to have some impact, and just because the Russian propaganda is not rational propaganda. It appeals to all different kinds of emotions and, and this idea of myths of being great and having, half of the world. So that's why I don't think that rationality is the only way that we could use. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I would disagree with you, because I think that since language is a rational structure, and the KGB, FSB, they were very acute and very professional in manipulating these things. They were using the language structure, the lexics, how this should be said, when it should be said. So it's a very rational calculation. And so therefore they were constructing this narrative. So I think that deconstructing also can be rational. We only have to study this very carefully from the very beginning, how this was done, and then we can find a way how it can be undone. Speaking about the dissent, I also cannot agree with you, because in the first day after the invasion, there were protests in Russia, and that was not so. These were very brave people. They were not afraid that they will be sent to the war. They were against. They were how to say, naturally, humanly against the war. These were the people who were opponents of the regime. They are very so the bravest. They were the bravest of them. So they were not afraid to be taken to the police and to risk their health because they can be tortured there or humiliated. That's a great risk for any human. And then when this dissent was cracked down very quickly, then yes, most people just decided to evade this war and to leave Russia. Speaking about people of Donbass, Russians, they said that it's a separate nation from Ukrainians, but it's a part of Russian nation in the same way how Tatars, Mordva, Kalmyks, Chechens are also a different ethnicity, but they are part of the Russian nation. So they just invented a new Donbass nation, like they were invented some and it was like another ethnic groups inside Russia. So there was no confusion, right? That's calling the something as separate from the Ukrainian and separate from the Russian, but at the same time being the part of the greater Russian nation. Why they did not make it a part of Russian state before 2022? I think that they were preparing for the greater invasion all of these 8 years. So it was part of the plan, but it have to be implemented later.
Thank you. And what about losses during Second World War? Sorry.
The Putin's questions. No, he is a well-known liar. He just sometimes he invents the facts. So sometimes he straightforwardly lied. So he doesn't care about the accuracy. He doesn't, and he can be so careless about accuracy, because anyway his speech would be corrected and would be disseminated in the media in a good way, in a better way. So he can say something, but then these messages would be corrected for the for the distribution in the media. So he never pays attention to whether he says something accurate or not very accurate.
Thank you.
Thanks. Lana Hayworth has a question from the train. In relation to Katerina's question, is your position that there was a designated department within the KGB for constructing justification of myths? Which one would it be? Trying to visualize how this would work in practice. Total lack of knowledge, but just intrigued by the point. Is this something you can speak to, or?
Well, I don't know. I don't know whether why I'm referring to the KGB and FSB. Well, there was a story when I worked for the presidential administration in 2005, and we referred to materials. Well, we were given the materials about how Russians invented the narrative about the competition between West and Russia during the presidential elections in 2004. And this was done by the specific group connected to FSB. I cannot remember the names or department, but the affiliation was very, very clear with FSB.
Okay. Hannah, do you want to, did you have?
Thank you. Petro, thank you for your presentation. I have, let's say, more methodological question. Have to be Ukrainian and researcher of Russian propaganda during the Russian-Ukrainian war at the same time. Can you share your personal reflection how to work in this topic? Thank you.
How to work on the topic of
Russian propaganda when you are Ukrainian during the Russian-Ukrainian war. How you work with your emotions.
No, I think it's a part of professional degradation. I've been studying propaganda since 2007 and dealing with Russian propaganda since 2014. So yes, the heaviest period of my study was 2014, when I read everything about genocide, fascists, crucified boys, mass graves, and all the flow of hatred. So actually, there were a number of people like Prokhanov or Maxim Shevchenko, a blogger and a Russian journalist. Prokhanov, Shevchenko, they have written at that time such texts, so really dirty texts. So, and in a kind of, so I went through this through experience, and then afterwards, I'm reading without any kind of emotions. So it's a part of, you need to study it for years, and then it's part of your professional degradation. Then you just read the text and analyze it without the emotions. However, sometimes it can be difficult, but it's a part of your profession. Sorry.
Thanks. Sergey, did you? I'm trying. You have your hand raised, and somehow you're not responding when I'm trying to. So
there is one more Lana's question in the chat.
Oh yeah, so I'll ask that. Lana says that I can see the point about this series of carefully choreographed myths, but what about the timing? Why did it have to be February 2022? Was it because the building blocks myths were all laid out, or just random timing?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it, yeah?
I mean, the timing of invasion.
Yeah, I'm assuming. Yeah.
No, I don't think that was what I can say. I think it's was more like a military calculation. Anyway, everything, as I said, was prepared in advance. Actually, I can tell you one thing. What I was impressed, really impressed, is that when they took Kherson and they started to put billboards in the city, on the streets of Kherson, with Pushkin, who says that the Kherson is the city where Pushkin was, and Russia is here forever. So they looked well prepared, well designed, so masterfully designed. And then I understood that actually that was prepared. They were prepared before February 2022. And of course, I think that the same, I think the same billboards were prepared for Kharkiv, for Dnipro, for Zaporizhia, for Odessa, of course. So we just seen one of the examples, because Pushkin was in Odessa too. Well, it would be, I would say that it would be great if somehow our intelligence can take these billboards and to prove the intentions of the Russians and how they prepared this invasion. But as for February, no, I think it was. I don't think that it was somehow connected to the propaganda work.
Okay. So anybody else who has questions, or what's the? So go ahead. We can't hear you. So or I don't know if you're talking, or just type it or something. I don't know. Okay. On that note, thank you, Petro. It was a really fascinating talk. You know, you're kind of stunningly sober in the face of unimaginable you know, conditions, and so I really appreciate that, and thank you so much. And I don't know if you had any kind of final words you wanted to add, or
no, I just want to thank you. Actually, I prepared my speech, and one of the first words were that I want to thank you to you, Lukan, and to University of Toronto, to program of Petro Jacyk Fellowship that you managed, that you selected me, and I especially, and I'm so thankful to you that you give me access to the library. I tell you, this is the most wonderful library and a database that I've ever experienced. Please, so if you allow me, I just want to ask. It presumes that we will be given a kind of stipend in the end. Please, I can, if it's possible, I would exchange my stipend for this payments or money for the access to the library. Really, at least maybe until the end, if it's possible, until the end of this year, or at least for the 6 months or whatever. That's really helpful. Really, believe me that by this program you helped not only me but my country in counteracting Russian propaganda in Africa and in Latin America too. I cannot give you more details. Sorry.
Okay. Well, you're certainly not going to. You cannot convince us to not give you your stipend. That's impossible. Well, we will talk to you if you want to. You know, talk to us separately about sort of the library access. I'm happy to do that. You know, this is really Ksenia's work. I mean, and I will sort of echo what you say about the library. The library is stunning. It's you know, a massive collection, one of the, I don't know, the top best in North America, and I completely agree with you that it's one of our major assets here at the university, and I'm glad you're making good use of it. And I will certainly pass it on to Ksenia, so it'll make her very happy.
Everyone, I'm sorry for interrupting. All the fellows have access until 31st of August of this year. So we've requested for 1 full year.
Yeah. So.
Oh, great. That's amazing. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a great library. Anyways, thank you so much. So next week, Vladimir Dubovik will be speaking, and I can only hope that it's as good a discussion as we had today. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.